Raptors Weekly Podcast for August the 2nd. He's been waiting in the green room for over 2 hours. It's Tim Chisholm. How's it going, man?
It's good. How you doing?
Not bad. How's your summer going so far?
Yeah, so far can't complain. Just got back from the cottage. All's well in the world. Can't wait to talk some Raptors ball at this most peak time of NBA season.
Yes. This is where you have to have at least a 2-minute opening intro just to kill some time, and we can fill up 30 minutes on the podcast. So to make matters interesting a little bit, Tim, behind door number 1 you have a Jared Utoff, and behind door number 2 you have Jerry Stackhouse, who's set to take over the Raptors 905. You pick which one you want to handle first.
I like the Stackhouse.
Okay, Stackhouse. What's your memory of Stackhouse as a player?
I remember Stackhouse vividly. I mean, Stackhouse was one of those sort of guys that came out of that VC era of sort of athletic swingmen who never really seemed to get to that like top tier of what their skills suggested they would be. He was like a pure volume guy, and I remember, I think maybe the most defining part of his career, up until he got traded and became a sixth man in Dallas, was the fact that the Pistons instantly became measurably better when he got sent to Washington in exchange for Rip Hamilton.
I recall Stackhouse as the guy who was partnered with Allen Iverson for a few years.
Back in Philly?
Back in Philly, yeah. Him and Iverson were supposed to be the two guys that would lead Philly forward. And it was more like, is there enough ball in Philadelphia for both of them? And I think Stackhouse left because he had some issues with Iverson, and I think maybe he saw himself as a comparable player, somebody who needed his own team. And then he left for Detroit, I think, in his third year. Had like a good run in Detroit, averaged 20 points, 29 points, went up, but after that didn't really amount to anything and wasn't really part of the Pistons' 2004 championship team.
Yeah, but the thing is that it was when he went to Washington that brought in the Rip Hamilton deal. And I think Rip Hamilton was such a perfect fit for that Detroit team and what they were trying to do because he didn't need the ball like Stackhouse did. I mean, it's funny you brought up the Iverson time with him and Stackhouse because, I mean, I'm sort of clawing back in my memory, but I sort of feel like that was one of the very first times I remember the storyline being, is there enough ball in this sort of era of like really ball-dominant guards? I mean, I know it was something that kind of came up back in the 70s with the Knicks when Earl Monroe and Clyde Frazier were playing together, but even then it was a different kind of basketball. Like the 90s and early 2000s was so isolation-heavy that the idea of is there enough ball was like a real problem because everyone just loved to stand around and pound it. And I do remember that it was Stackhouse and Iverson was that first one where it's like, how can that possibly work? The NBA doesn't involve these like really intricate passing sets anymore. You need one guy who's going to create and the rest of it, and one guy who's going to post up, and the rest of the guys just fit around that. And Stackhouse was sort of the first victim of that, of the kind of pendulum swinging the other way in that era.
And what was unique about that combo was that they were both backcourt players. Usually that happened when you had a big man and a guard and you didn't know how to share it. But in this case, they were both starting caliber players playing in the backcourt.
Yeah, fully. And both really good. I mean, that was the other thing too. It's that you could almost sort of like, see how that sort of thing doesn't work when you're dealing with one guy who's clearly superior. But they were both good players. I mean, Iverson was better.
Yeah.
But these were actually two guys that had a reason to believe that they should be the ones headlining the offense.
Mm-hmm.
But as you sort of saw when they got broken up, I mean, it's not a perfect comparable because, careers are affected by a million different things. But Stackhouse going to Detroit, the reputation that he carried was similar to Iverson in that he dominates the ball, doesn't shoot a great percentage. But the difference is Iverson's teams won.
Yeah.
Iverson got his team of him, Mutombo, and a lot of role players to the NBA Finals, whereas Stackhouse was like scratching and clawing to make the playoffs every year.
In fact, I don't know if there's been a worse team than that Sixer team to make it to the NBA Finals. I can't recall. Maybe Indiana, or was that after or before Philadelphia? I think that was after.
Yeah, Indiana made it against the Lakers. I think no, they made it against the Nets. No, they could have made it against the Nets.
No, it was the Lakers. It was the Lakers.
Yeah,
Well, good news, Tim. I think we've filled up enough, buffer in this podcast to crack the 30-minute mark. So we can talk about Jerry Stackhouse, the new reported head coach of the Raptors 905. So he's 3 years removed from his playing career. His last season was the 2012-13 season, where he played 37 games for Brooklyn, and now he finds himself as a head coach of the Raptors 905 after Jesse Mermis went to be the second man in front of Luke Walton. And I say this is pretty good progress for Jerry Stackhouse, who's I guess well ahead of the coaching curve at the age 41 and already at a somewhat significant position with a club.
Well, it's always funny with players, like former NBA players, but especially former sort of all-star NBA players, is when they get into coaching, you never really know how serious they are about it. When you've sort of kind of done one thing your whole life and the body breaks down and you can't play anymore, coaching becomes a sort of, all right, well, that's a way I can sort of stay in the game, and it always becomes interesting to see which players are really serious about it. But I mean, if he's willing to coach a D-League team with that schedule, with that caliber of player, and that far out of the spotlight, I think it says a lot about him in terms of what he actually wants to do with this coaching career. He's really willing to pay his dues. I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah. I'll tell you who's taken it seriously, hasn't gotten any reward. Patrick Ewing.
Seriously.
He's come up on the podcast a few times, and he's one guy you can't help but feel sorry for, because he is a Hall of Fame player, one of the premier big men of his time. The list, he didn't win an NBA title, but did everything else practically, but still cannot seem to get a crack on anything.
Yeah, I feel bad for Ewing in that, because, I mean, like you said, he's paid his dues a dozen times over with it, but you almost sort of feel like he's sort of coming up at that time where there's this weird crossover in terms of guys who really, and GMs who have the business backgrounds, the analytics background, and they just don't trust former players to be coaches, or at least former star players to be coaches. Yeah. And I don't know, we're not in the room when Ewing is getting interviewed, which has only happened once, for a head coaching job. But I mean, like, he's been around long enough to know, and he's stuck on enough assistant staffs that you don't believe that he's a guy who is inflexible about refusing to do the analytics game. I mean, he's a pragmatist. That's an assistant coach you have to be. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the Ewing one is kind of sad.
Yeah. Or let's switch back to some Raptor talk, and let's start with the draft. The Raptors got two guys out of it this time around. They got Jakob Poeltl, a center, with their first pick, and then they went with Pascal Siakam, who's basically a lanky power forward who's kind of fast and athletic. What did you make of the draft first of all, the fact that they actually drafted? Were you surprised by the get they got out of this draft, or were you going into it, were you thinking that this is going to get shipped over for something more tangible?
When the season ended, I thought that this might actually be a scenario where they're not going to use at least the first pick, at least the ninth pick. I didn't think that they were actually going to wind up using it, because I didn't think the value that you're going to get from a pick like that was going to translate to the kinds of things that the team needs. I mean, the thing is that every year with this Raptors team, they keep adding players to sort of that end of the bench stock lineup of young developing players, and there comes that point when you just don't have spots at the end of your bench. And so we start looking at the draft, and the top of the draft is generally supposed to be kind of about potential and not necessarily guys that you figure you could slide in right away. That said, this was a weird draft because it wasn't particularly stellar at the top, and you could almost afford now to go for a guy that has a bit more of a ready to play now, maybe a bit of a lower ceiling. So in hindsight, okay, I can see why they didn't make a trade, but I really did expect them coming out of the season that this is not a team that can bring in two more guys under the age of 24 to try to find a way into their rotation when you knew that Bismack was going to be gone.
Yeah. I think we all appreciated the Raptors 905 being a kind of dumping ground for new potential and kind of training grounds for new guys. But it now just seems that the end of the bench ends in Mississauga.
Mm-hmm. It's true, and it's something that you look at the way that the guys, with the exception of Powell, obviously, which is a whole other kettle of fish, but you look at a lot of these guys like Bebe and Bruno, and it's like, it's great that they're improving, and I think it's clear that they have been improving, but they haven't been improving to the point where you're now looking at them and saying, okay, you can slide them into the rotation. At best, what you're saying, at least as it pertains to Bebe, is that this is a guy that you can throw in every once in a while in specific scenarios. Like, I know there's talk that he's going to get the first crack at being the backup center this year, and I think that's going to last about 3 weeks. I think that he's just a guy that teams figured out so quickly last year when he actually started getting regular minutes. His game is still incredibly raw. He's got like really cool skills. He's got a nice soft touch. He's a great passer, but I just don't think that there's enough there to really insert him into a regular spot in the rotation. So the 905 thing is great. It's cool. I think that it should be a trend that every team has their own D-League team, because I think it is a terrific way to maximize draft assets. But I just don't necessarily look at it at this point like the players that they have in those roles, again, with the exception of Powell, are really ready to be piped right into the main team, which is why I think the two guys they took in the draft this year are two guys that, again, maybe you take a bit of a hit on their ceiling, but they're guys that you can sort of see how they might have a role playing real minutes with the team this season.
This season, that's the key thing that people might debate you on is the this season part. I mean, having watched a bit of Summer League, I would even venture to guess that someone like Siakam is probably more ready for NBA playing time, just because his game is conducive to just garbage time, like not garbage time, but like like hustle points and running up and down the floor, trying to block some shots, basically an energy guy. Whereas Pirtle is more of a skill guy, and I still think his skill is a couple of years away from being rotation ready at least. So I'm not convinced that the guy is ready to contribute this year for sure. But I think Siakam is somebody you could basically dump into the Bebe type role. What did you think of Pirtle first as a selection? Like, do you really think he's NBA ready or like ready for the rotation next season?
I mean, I think he's ready for minutes, but maybe not the rotation. Like, he's the guy for me that, let's assume, okay, obviously Valanciunas is starting. He'll play, let's say, 30 minutes a game, and I think you're going to get a lot of minutes with Sullinger at center. I mean, that was the one thing about, people sort of look at the way the rotation went last year, and he would usually have like a very hard power forward center rotation. But he had that because, he being Casey, he had that because Biyombo could only play center. And I think now that you're in a situation where you've got guys like Sullinger and like Patterson that could actually slide a little bit between the two front court positions, depending on matchups, I think it allows someone like Pirtle in a very, very specific matchup-dependent situation where he could get minutes. I don't think this is a guy where you would pencil him in for 10 minutes a night and say, no matter what's happening, go to it. But he's a guy that I think has just enough tricks in his book. I mean, I think he's got a nice feel around the basket. I like his rebounding game. I think that the style of play in the summer league and the caliber of opponents kind of masks the fact that he's not a terrific defender yet. But I don't know. I'm curious to see what he does in preseason. He's of all the guys sort of coming in and out and seeing how the rotations go. Because I agree with you with Siakam. I think he's a much easier guy to peg in terms of what he would do if he got minutes at this level. I don't really know how Casey would use Pirtle yet, and that's one of the things I'm really curious about when October rolls around.
I have a proposed NBA comp for Pirtle.
Okay.
Joel Przybilla.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that.
I think if things go well for him, he could be a serviceable player who could play 12 years in the league. Because he's got a bit of a jumper. You saw that in summer league. You didn't see him like take jumpers in games, but you saw in the clips that were coming out that he does have a bit of a range. He's bulky. He can throw his weight around the block. He seems to be an intelligent guy, and that's basically what kept Przybilla in the league for a very, very long time. And I think you said it earlier. I think you take a hit on the ceiling, but you get basically a baseline talent which could contribute. I'm just not convinced it's going to be next year. But at the same time, the way the roster is structured right now, it almost has to be between him or Bebe.
And that's the thing is that someone is going to have to suck up those minutes off the bench when Sullinger's in foul trouble or they're going up against a particularly big backup center. And I don't know that either one. I mean, I guess maybe for me what it is it's not so much that I believe so much in Pirtle. It's just for me, I worry that we've seen who Bebe is at this point. That between getting to watch a ton of him in the D-League last season and then getting to watch his stints with the big team, I feel like we've got a pretty good sense of who he is as a player. And I don't know. I don't know that it's enough. I don't know that it's enough that where you're going to say he'll be the guy that gets those minutes, because I think part of those minutes is also an investment. Every minute that Bebe plays is a minute that Pirtle doesn't play, if that makes sense. And, and if you're looking at these sort of valuable minutes in terms of playing against real NBA competition versus the heavy minutes you get in the D-League against D-League competition, I think you need both of them. And you need both of them for them to understand when they're in the D-League, okay, these are the things I need to work on, not because they're important for me in the D-League, but these are the things I need to work on because they were exposed at the NBA level.
Let me ask you a question I asked Sam in the last podcast. If Bebe was a free agent right now, would he get an NBA offer?
That's a good question.
The fact that the answer isn't a yes probably tells you what our opinion is of Bebe. Nice guy, but I just don't see if he's the answer there. Here's some more Joel Przybilla, Jakob Poeltl comparisons. They both have the initials JP.
That's true.
And they both were selected with the 9th pick.
Really? Przybilla went 9?
Przybilla was the 9th pick going to Houston in 2000, and obviously Poeltl was the 9th pick in 2016. So there you go. The writing is on the wall.
Well, the nice thing, too, about a comp like that is that it does demonstrate the kinds of things you can get out of. If you're a team that's already like a playoff team, and even in the case of the Raptors, as you're a deep playoff team, and you're gifted with the top 10 pick, if you're not able to get one of the top guys in this draft, and the Raptors were arguably one pick away from getting one of the top guys in the draft, then I like the fact that what you then go for is somebody that, as an organization, you feel, doesn't mean you're right, but it's a guy that you feel that if we develop him properly, will just be a solid bench player, but will be a solid bench player that is able to fill in gaps. We can develop his game to fill in gaps. You're not trying to develop a guy almost like, in an extreme case of like a Bebe as a Bruno, where, if he hits, you hope he hits big, but the odds are slim, but you're kind of trying to refine all aspects of his game. Whereas you go a guy like Pirtle, like, no, okay, we know what we would need from him in a reserve role. And I don't know. I mean, I like that they kind of went that route. They're not trying to swing for the fences on it. They want a guy that they hope can, during his rookie deal, be an actual contributor to this team, and feel fairly confident that will happen.
Mm-hmm. Interesting fact about Joel Przybilla, never took an NBA 3.
Really?
Never took an NBA 3.
That's impressive. Even, over the course of 12 years, never just like a half-court heave.
No, nothing. I mean, discipline. A for discipline there. All right. Let's move over to some NBA free agency talk, and describe to me in one word or one sound maybe when your reaction when you heard about DeMar DeRozan's max deal.
I expected.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's the conversation that in about the 6 months leading up to free agency, so going back to the season, like, whenever I would talk to anybody about the Raptors, all anyone wanted to ask is what's going to happen with DeRozan. And for me, it was they're going to re-sign him to a max deal. And in fact, they got him to a bit under a max is whatever. I mean, it's still a massive, massive deal that's going to be a massive part of their salary cap. But I just don't think they could have afforded to let him go. I think that it's one of the, I know that he's not a flawless player. I've written many times as much about DeRozan, but I think that he's just one of those guys that when you're an organization like the Raptors, to a certain degree, you have to play the hand that you're dealt. And he is that hand. Him and Lowry are that hand. And I think, that when Lowry's contract comes up next year, you're probably going to be in a very similar situation where Lowry's getting a bit older, and the 4-year deal for Lowry is even that much more uncomfortable because smaller guards in the NBA don't tend to age very well. But if he's in a situation where he has a half-decent year this year and the Raptors make it to the second or third round again, you have to re-sign him to basically a max deal.
Yeah.
It's kind of uncomfortable, and it really puts into stark relief what the team's future is going to look like. But it's sort of how the game is played.
Yeah, Yeah, it's a question of length basically when it comes to Lowry's deal next season. I mean, is it going to be is a 3-year or a 4-year deal, and what's on offer there? But going back to DeRozan, I mean, I think we've talked. I mean, exactly. I mean, no, I don't think anybody was surprised that he got signed to the deal, and I think it was pretty much expected. Even himself on Instagram, he dropped a few hints that he was going to do this, and the only guy who was adamant that he would go anywhere was Stephen A. Smith, who was committed for DeRozan signing with the Lakers. Even after the Raptors got eliminated by the Cavaliers, he stood on the ACC floor and gave a whole interview about how he was positive that he would go to the go to the Lakers while the Let's Go Raptors chants were happening in the back. It did not make any sense. So DeRozan is entering his 8th season. Can you believe it? 8th season next year.
That's crazy.
And every year we seem to talk about, well, this is his summertime to-do list, 3-point shot, better handles. Let's leave that aside and just talk about, is this the player that we have now? Like, how much is it realistic for us? Like, really, it's a yes or no question and with an explanation. Like, is it realistic for us to expect any significant or marked improvements from DeRozan at this point in his career?
No, and I assume you agree with that too. Yeah. But I think the thing with DeRozan is that if you actually look at it in terms of the skills that he's brought back, sort of summer after summer, is they've at best sort of just been tweaks, and I think that the experience in the playoffs last year, where you actually started to see a couple of light bulbs flash for him in terms of, okay, I kind of get how to play against the kind of defenses they're throwing at me, all that sort of stuff. I mean, there'll be refinement to the mental part of his game as he gets older, just because that's what experience can do. But no, I think in terms of this idea that 1 year he's going to come back and have a 3-point shot, or 1 year he's going to come back and just be a stellar defender, I don't think that that's where we are anymore with this guy. He is who he is. He's a very, very, very good player. He's an all-star, but he's clearly a notch below the best that the league has to offer. But them's the breaks.
See, I agree with you, but I have a counterexample to offer.
Okay.
It's Kyle Lowry. That's a guy who pretty much, late in his career, in his 7th or 8th year, had his breakthrough year in terms of like being noticed in the league. That's when he averaged 18 points a game. He averaged 17.9, 17.8, and last year he was 21. This is when he was, 29, 30 years old. So you have an example on the team of a guy that did kind of reinvent himself to take himself to the next level. Now, I think the difference here is that Lowry didn't come up with a brand new skill at that age. Like, I think he basically, grew as a person, as a player, his intelligence grew, and he finally figured out how to function as part of a team and be productive. He kept his, off the court issues or his coaching battles aside and developed into this mature player. Whereas I think the issue with DeMar is that he needs to develop some skills to get to the next level, whereas Lowry kind of already had those skills.
Yeah, and I mean, the Lowry one is always interesting, but the thing was, too, is that for Lowry's career to the point where he came to the Raptors, even in his first year with the Raptors, it was the story of this guy who was, a bench player, he's a starter. He's a bench player, he's a starter. Do people trust him? Do they not really trust him? And I think, it's like you said, it was almost opportunity that allowed him that ascension. Whereas with DeRozan, I mean, I remember being shocked and a little miffed when Jay Triano handed him a starting spot in his first game of his NBA career and has started basically every single game thereafter. He's a guy that, to his credit, still worked on his game and improved and didn't let that sort of thing stifle him. But I just feel like the thing that you had with Lowry was still the kind of hunger to sort of prove that he deserved an opportunity, whereas I think DeRozan has never been short on opportunities. I mean, he's sitting here, he's going to be playing in the Olympics and for Team USA, which I don't think even 3 years ago would have ever expected to happen for him. It's just, and the thing is that for me, I guess with a guy like DeRozan is that there's almost like nothing wrong with the place that he has reached. It's just, it's relative to what the team would really need for him to be in order for the team to be like a legit challenger to a squad like Cleveland. He's just not there, and it's it's always weird to kind of have to shift from that. Well, maybe DeRozan becomes that guy this year too. Okay, so how do you make this team that strong without necessarily having the kind of player that you would need in order to knock? I mean, how do you become the Chauncey Billups Pistons, which is always what you try to do in this situation. But but we'll see. I mean, weird. Like Jason Kidd became a 3-point shooter at the end of his career. So I guess who knows? But
who knows? Yeah.
Yeah.
But were you? So I'll take you down memory lane, and we'll go back to October 28th, 2009.
Okay.
Which is when Demar DeRozan made his debut against the Cavaliers, and the Raptors won that game 101-91. And you said you were surprised that he got the start. And let me tell you who else was a candidate to get a start. Okay?
Yeah.
Marcus Banks,
mm-hmm.
Antoine Wright,
mm-hmm.
Jared Jack,
mm-hmm.
and Marco Bellinelli.
So you're saying there maybe wasn't great competition for that starting spot.
I don't think it was I remember when he got the start, I was like, okay, good. I mean, at least we're investing in somebody who's going to be here for a while. That was my reaction. I mean, rather than give it to Marco freaking Bellinelli.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it wasn't for me. It came as much as anything from a notion of, and it proved to be ill-founded. I will admit that fully, but it came from a notion of giving a guy a starting spot right off the bat felt a little bit like, well, what now does he have to work for? And this coming, I think, also comes from a little bit from still that sting of that like late 90s, early 2000s kinds of thing where you had tons and tons and tons of young athletic players who got everything they could have wanted right out of the gate and flamed out of the league just as quickly. I had that sort of fear that you're going to be handing somebody the kind of keys to the starting lineup, and there just wouldn't be that need for him to really put his nose to the grindstone and work on the parts of his game that he was going to need to work on in order to become the kind of player that he is.
Yeah.
Again, turned out to be ill-founded. It turned out that he is arguably the hardest working all-star the team has ever had.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of me definitely not sort of knowing what the team had in a guy who was 19 years old.
Well, we'll get back to some more free agent talk with Jared Sullinger just momentarily, but in that game, Tim, you might recall that...
I might. We'll see.
That in that game, the leading scorer for the Raptors was none other than fill in the blank.
I assumed it was... Oh, I know exactly who it is. It's Andrea Bargnani.
It was Andrea Bargnani. Yes, he had 28 points on 11 of 15 shooting as he powered the Raptors over the Cavaliers. And LeBron James led Cavaliers to send the Cavaliers to 0-2 and the Raptors to 1-0 to start the season. And news broke out this week that the same Andrea Bargnani, Tim, I regret to inform you, is now out of the league as he signs with Spanish club Saski Baskonia. Now, have you heard of Saski Baskonia?
I cannot say I know much more about them than the fact that every once in a while they pop up on my Hoops hype feed.
So put a ribbon and a bow in Andrea Bargnani's career for me.
This is how the Bargnani one ends for me, is because part of the narrative that always dogged Vince Carter when he was in Toronto was that he didn't max out his potential, and I think it's a narrative that fits so much more appropriately on someone like Bargnani, who was gifted with so much physical potential, with so much like skill with which to tap into, but I've never seen a player care less about improving. Also, probably, maybe let's retroactively say that that's also why I didn't like the idea of DeRozan starting that first game when you have these examples in front of you. But that's the thing. The Bargnani one was just a case of a guy that just didn't want to be better. I mean, even when you're just talking about the fact that the guy refused to rebound, and it didn't help that Colangelo would insist upon giving him an out whenever he was asked about it, because at the end of the day, he should have just been better. He's a 7-footer. And the idea, well, he's not going to get rebounds because he's out behind the three-point line. He's not behind the three-point line on the defensive end of the floor.
Yeah.
It was so asinine. But at the very least, here's a situation where here's an NBA skill you don't have but you need to have, and that basically every other player in the league at your height does better than you. So it's you are the worst at doing this one thing. Why don't you at least just try to be the fifth worst, the 10th worst?
Yeah.
It's just there was just no pride in that actually being improved upon, and I think that's the Andrea Bargnani story.
I think that's the key word. Yeah, I think it's pride. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's exactly. And like if I can add to it, I don't want to spend too much time on Bargs, but I always felt his offensive skill was highly overrated. Like I did not think that he was a good spot up shooter, but everything else was he was very unsure of himself. The long twos, the pull up, line drives, the weird finishing at the rim, the offensive fouls, the always not being aware of where he is on the court. Yeah, he made a few nice passes here and there, ran a break a couple times, but everybody does that. You give a guy 36 minutes a game, he's going to make a couple of nice plays, just law of averages. For him, he just didn't make enough of them, and his occasional three, him being 7 foot tall, it just people go, oh, Nowitzki, like all these comparisons were made. But, at the end of the day, he was just not a good offensive player, and he was a terrible defensive player. It's just much like Anthony Bennett. He just happened to be the number one pick for the, he shouldn't have been the number one pick, and, that's basically it. So I don't actually see his career as a disappointment or he didn't pan out. I just thought that he really should have been the 18th pick in the draft. It's end of story.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that of all the missteps that Brian Colangelo had as GM of the Raptors, and there were some really bad ones, there were some some really good steps, but the way in which, not the fact, but the way in which he hooked himself into Andrea Bargnani, I think might have been his biggest misstep, because there were checkpoints along the way that he had to not tear him down by any stretch, but like to change the narrative about what he felt about this guy. And I felt that he was so obsessed with being right about Andrea Bargnani that it was a disservice to just about everything else he was trying to do with the Raptors. It became an unintentional obsession because this was a guy that you had at just various points to decide whether or not he was the guy that you should be banking things on. And I am a firm believer in the idea that people within teams know this stuff a good year and a half before any fan does, because they're sitting there in every single practice. They're talking with them every single day. I mean, you just get to see a side of these guys so much earlier or so much quicker than any of the fans really get to over the course of seasons to see what kind of player this is. And Colangelo knew where this story was going. He knew this is where it was going to wind up, and he just couldn't help himself from continuing to stoke the fire, to convincing people that this is a guy that they can turn around. When he brought in Dwayne Casey as head coach, and this is now pretty deep into Bargnani's career with the Raptors, he's making the comparison that look at what Dwayne Casey and his defensive schemes were able to do to protect Dirk Nowitzki. He's still making that comparison. The Bargnani one is just, there's.
I'm actually surprised. I mean, and Bargnani kept Colangelo basically out of the league, unemployable for a long period of time until his dad took over Philly. In fact, I'm kind of surprised he hasn't made a play for Andrea Bargnani to give him like one more chance. Let's just move on. Andrea Bargnani, good luck in Spain. The weather's nice. I'm sure they don't demand too much of you. Let's talk about Jared Sullinger, who was a free agent signing that the Raptors left late, and. Were you surprised at the quality of player the Raptors were able to achieve that late in free agency when all the big names sort of fell off the board?
Yeah, I really was. I really was. And it was interesting because there was a talk, and I think it was Eric Corrine who wrote this, and it was a good piece, but before free agency was about to start, I think he had a piece talking about the fact that this was almost the worst year to not have cap space, because there's so much money sort of flying around. The Raptors have certain needs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was well-reasoned, whatever. But it was interesting because I actually now that the free agency period is actually played out, and played out in a very unexpected way, which is you had that first week, which was just insanity. And then the faucet just turned off. And even though there was tons of teams still had tons of money, you weren't seeing those deals being thrown around at the next tier guys. You didn't see teams being willing to absorb other guys' contracts to save face in the event that they weren't able to spend their free agent money. And so it was interesting to me that I actually think that Ujiri may have wound up in a beneficial position to have not had all that money to spend, because at some point the cap will level out and these contracts will be a massive part of your cap table. And he sat and waited and got a guy like Jared Sullinger, who is a legit starter, like a fifth quality starter, but a legit starter in the NBA. And he got him for a fraction of what everyone else was paying. I was totally surprised that deal was available to the Raptors when it was.
Yeah, yes, same here. Did not expect that to go. And it was nice to see, and I mentioned this on the last pod, was that a guy take less money to come to Toronto, because that usually doesn't happen. Usually go the other way and overpay mediocre guys to come over. So it was good to see a quality dude come over and try to make a run at the championship with the Raptors, even though that's a bit unrealistic. But let's talk about that just briefly. The Raptors, have they, given what's happening on the Eastern Front in Boston, and Indiana has improved a bit. Boston obviously has done well for themselves. Depends on what you think Chicago's doing. You might think they improved, or you might think they went down. Overall, let's not talk about whether the Raptors improved or not. Do they have an equal shot of getting to the Eastern Conference Finals next year, or is it improved, or is it lessened?
I would say it's probably equal. I mean, I think that the Boston one is the only one that kind of makes you hesitate. But I would say I would look at the way that bringing in someone like Al Horford to me is like bringing in someone like Kyle Lowry. These are guys who are not still at the level of a LeBron. So you're like a high B+ caliber all-star. So I think that they maybe kind of are neck and neck as teams. And so, I don't know, maybe that makes it like a worse chance for them to get there. But on the whole, I just don't think that the caliber of teams in the East has really shot up to the place where the Raptors are afraid for their second position in the conference. I think that there are teams gunning for them, and maybe teams that feel like they have a better shot at them. But I don't think that you should, going into the season, I look at it like they have definitely been knocked down a peg.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you look at the standings last year, just at a high level, I mean, we were one back of the Cavs for the best record in the East, and then the next team behind us was Miami, which was 8 games back. Okay, so I think that 8-game gap is now maybe 4 or 5, maybe 3, but I still think the Raptors are the best of the rest in the East. And despite some improvements from the Celtics, I think the Indiana improvements scare me a little bit more, because you now see Paul George really healthy for another year. I think they upgraded their point guard spot a little. Another year together, I mean, might make a big difference there. But I still think the Raptors are the second best team in the East. I don't think that has really changed, despite all the money they got thrown around in the East this season. Dwight Howard in Atlanta, so on and so forth. The overall, once the dust kind of settled, you saw the Raptors having been replaced Luis Scola with Sullinger and Biyombo with Pirtle / Siakam. They're more or less the same, and you can make the argument that with another year behind them, they're actually ready to maybe challenge a little bit more this season than last. So overall, man, I think it's been the offseason is a bit disappointing because of some of the names that were thrown around early in the summer on who the Raptors might get. Al Horford was there, Paul Millsap was there, Serge Ibaka was there, and suddenly you ended up with Jared Sullinger. I think that was the disappointing aspect of the offseason. But once you look at the big picture and how once the dust settled, it's not bad at all.
No, it's really not. And I think that there's a weird crossover that's happening for Raptors fans, because it used to be whenever you would go into the summer, there was this talk about the Raptors need to make some sort of major move.
Yep.
Because for so long they've been so bad. And all of a sudden you're in a position where it's like you would like to make a big move. And that's a massive mental shift, because you do exactly like you said. I mean, you can sort of survey the landscape of all these other teams that did make major moves, and you say, well, hell, like I think that this team is still basically better than all of those teams. And it's because what they were working from to begin with was such a high caliber organization. And going back to something you had even said earlier about the idea that a guy like Sullinger would choose to come to a team like Toronto, probably at less money than he could have been able to get elsewhere, it goes to show you that the sort of lip service that the organization had been paying to culture and had been paying to making the city and the organization an attractive destination is sort of paying off. I mean, you're now looking at an organization that, okay, maybe you're not going to be on equal footing with a really, like, I don't know, if the Lakers were ever good again, your ability to get into the room in certain free agent meetings, maybe you're not at that level, but I think you're an organization now where if you have free agent money to spend, that's a real situation. And I do not, even the LaMarcus Aldridge thing happened last year, which was a nice boost, but I guess I just sort of things are sort of changing for this team, and it also helps with the Sullinger situation. What happened with Biyombo, which is if Ujiri knocks on your door and says, "Look, you can go to whatever team you want to go to. I can't control you, but here's what we can offer you. We'll tell you right now you'll start, and we'll tell you right now that you will have this role with the team. And if you want anybody to speak to that, here is Biyombo's phone number." Call him up and ask him if we didn't give him the exact same pitch last year about what his role would be and the opportunity he'd have and how it pays off. I mean, that stuff is currency.
Yeah.
And Ujiri has spun that maybe better than anything else he's played since joining the Raptors.
Yeah, I think Biyombo was on the cover of the brochure that they gave to Sullinger.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And would I be foolish to say that DeMar Carroll, as an Arsenal fan who, for a team that doesn't make many signings, whenever an injured player comes back, we always go, oh, he's like a new signing. DeMar Carroll sort of falls into that category where he didn't really have a full season at all with the club, and like his if he stays healthy next season, you might think he's sort of like a new signing.
Yeah, I think so. Well, because I also think that you're also now not dealing with the pressure of being the new signing that just inked a $15 million deal. Now it's like, okay, let's take a step back. Let's remember it's still DeMar Carroll, and you can sort of weave him into the lineup a lot more organically. I think that both he and the organization have a better sense of how he would fit if he's coming back fully healthy. You have a better sense of what skills he would need to work on, and I agree. I think that even if it's not quite at the level of, it's like having a new signing, I think you are bringing back the kind of intel that you need to make that signing more effective than it was last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree there. Let's DeLon Wright, by the way, news just broke today that he's out for 4 months after having shoulder surgery. I don't think that would have much impact on the Raptors' plans next season because the point guard spot, unfortunately for him, is basically stacked.
Yeah, this is a situation with Wright that I actually kind of feel bad for, because and Ujiri's even said as much, that he was basically drafted to be the backup point guard, and now he's staring down the barrel of a situation where, barring an injury to one of your teammates, you were just not going to play.
Yeah,
it's too bad.
I think what he meant to say was he was drafted to be the backup point guard in 7 years.
Yeah, exactly. Once Lowry or Joseph really starts to taper off, you'll be ready.
Yeah. So here's a question that gets asked a lot on the site, and this is one of the themes of the entire summer, is that now that the Raptors don't have any cap space to sign players, we have to resort to a trade, and the guy that everybody wants to trade is Terrence Ross because of his big deal, and you got to trade money to go the other way. Like, how much has, if it hasn't, just tell me I'm stupid, how much has the emergence of Norman Powell made Terrence Ross tradable? Or are people reading too much into that? Because right now the general thought is that you don't need Terrence Ross because you got Norman Powell. Are we underrating Ross here?
No.
No? Okay. Okay. So you're part of the crowd here.
Yeah, but I think it's because with what you're basically looking at that point, purely from my perspective, is when you're putting a guy like Powell out there, as much as you're dealing with his skills and his improved three-point shot and all the rest of it, you're putting out a guy with the kind of attitude that you want players with the Raptors to have on the court. And that kind of play is infectious. And a guy like Ross has never been known for his killer instinct. And that's not everybody. And that's, it's very much a kind of personality thing. You can't just develop that. But I think that if you're looking now at trying to figure out who's going to be getting certain minutes behind DeRozan and Carroll, and again, assuming Carroll is actually healthy this season, I would rather give those minutes to Powell. I just think that he is, if he's not today, then I think by the end of this year, he just will be a better player than Ross. And I think that, in theory, what you could get from Ross in a trade, because teams will always covet athleticism, they will always covet three-point shooting, I think would be a better benefit to the Raptors than having both Powell and Ross on the roster going forward.
Mm-hmm. Are you on Snapchat at all, Tim?
No.
No?
just a bit past my generation.
Oh, okay.
No,
because I was going to ask you if you would rather follow Terrence Ross or Draymond Green on Snapchat.
I don't know.
Okay. All right. Okay, let's switch to some NBA talk, man, before we sign off.
Cool.
And at this point, it's all bonus, Tim, because we're past well past 30 minutes, so we're good here.
Okay.
Looking at don't say Timothy Mozgov, okay?
Okay.
Don't say Mozgov, because everybody gives that answer, and let the guy enjoy his money. He's got a ring. Let the guy enjoy his money. Mm-hmm. Give me the deal of this summer. I know the cap is increased percentage, blah blah blah. Give me the one deal that you were like, holy shit.
I know exactly who I'm going to say, and I only preface it by saying, everyone knew he was going to get a deal like this, so it's not a case of I was shocked that he got it, but for me it's the case of the guy who just is completely not worthy of this kind of deal, is Chandler Parsons.
Mm-hmm.
Parsons for me is one of those guys that was an amazing story in Houston because he was a second-round pick, making basically no money, and was a huge part of their statistical dominance when he was with the team, yada, yada, yada. He's a good player. But the idea that Chandler Parsons is a max money player, the idea that Chandler Parsons is a guy that when you're an aging Grizzlies team that you sort of bring in because he's going to be that injection of youth to kind of bridge generations is insane to me. I mean, he is so just at an above average level for me,
yeah.
and is a guy that has a lot of skills but does nothing so well that I'm like, well, at least you'll always know you're going to get X from Chandler Parsons. That was the deal for me, and it was a little bit sad that it was Memphis was the one that finally got him, just because I like Memphis. I like what they've done for the last few years. I'm sad that they are on the downward arc of that generation. But yeah, it was Chandler Parsons, and I knew it was coming, and it just made me sad that it happened.
If Chandler Parsons is getting that kind of money, and I'm just thinking ahead to next summer, and I'm kind of coming back to the Raptors a little bit. Patrick Patterson is due for a new contract next year. And it's not unreasonable for me to suggest that in this NBA, Patrick Patterson next season might be making like $22 million a year.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. If Ryan Anderson is making $20 million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is there a chance that Ujiri can extend him from now until then? Do you think why would Patterson ever do that deal? He wouldn't, right?
I don't think he would. Yeah. And but I also don't know that Ujiri would.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I mean, Patterson's a weird one for me because I like Patterson. And
well, hang on, Tim. Are you telling me that if I gave you Patrick Patterson at say $19 million a year for the next 3 years, you wouldn't take him?
I don't know that I would. I'm not saying I wouldn't.
Explain me why.
Because the thing for me with Patterson is that it's the myth of his three-point shot. It's that he's a guy that, for me, if he was even if he was sort of that 39-40% three-point shooter consistently, that one sort of imagines him to be, I'd be all over that deal. I'd even say it's probably a steal, and you get him, and I'm happy. But he's just one of these guys that goes through the peaks and valleys of his three-point shot, where his average comes from having a month where he's shooting 45%, and then a month when he's shooting 30%, and a month he's shooting 45%. And for me, and it's a total bias that I have, but I just can't. I have so much trouble with players that I can't game plan for. I can't know. At least I can count on this from them on a consistent night-to-night basis, and anything above that is bonus, whatever. He's a guy he does so many things well with the team. He's such a good defender. Such a great screen setter. He's a great teammate, underrated passer. But it's that shot that just gets me.
I'd counter you with some stats here.
Please.
And I'd say that it's the opposite. I'd say he's had a couple of months where he was really poor, which has dragged down his shots. Because if you look at his three-point shooting last year, October, granted it's only 2 games, 40%. Then he had like 2 kind of bad months in November, December where he was 33 and 26. But then after that, he's at 44, 42, 42, and then April was basically the playoffs, 27 and 27%. So he had, 4 months of 40% shooting last season. So
but the 3 months of I mean that's what it is. I mean,
but isn't that with every shooter, or like give me a shooter that, don't say Steph Curry, but generally his type go through those ebbs and flows, don't they?
It's totally. I mean, I don't mind the ebbs and flows, but it's just like, for me, it's a case of the distance between the ebb and the flow is really stark for me, and it's just because there's times. I mean, even when you, how do I like? I just honestly, I mean, it's just I almost just need him to hit more 3-point shots.
Yeah.
It's not even necessarily because I think that it's the only way that the team can. I mean, the team did fine with him playing the way he did last year. It's fine. He's a bench player, so it's not even like you're sitting here saying, well, I think that's one thing that last year did a great job of solving is, Patterson is a bench player. He's a very good bench player. He's not a starter. It's fine. We get that.
My issue with Patterson is that he doesn't take enough threes.
Yes, totally.
He passes up too many clean looks. Like a guy like Terrence Ross last year launched 4.6 threes a game.
Yep, which is good.
You would think Patrick Patterson should launch more than that, considering he's always open in the corners and so on. He launched 3.7. That is criminally low for a guy who gets wide open looks on account of the penetration that DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry provide. So, is it confidence? We always talked about, we never really get to the bottom of it. But essentially, when the ball comes to you, man, just shoot it. Don't try to do too much. I mean, it'd be great if he could do a lot, if he could step in and take the mid-range jumper. Those are all like nice to haves, but kind of like DeRozan, like he's in his 8th year now, whatever it is. It's hard for me to imagine that he's going to develop that skill set this year or this late in his career. So may as well just shoot the jumper, man.
No, I totally agree. Because I just can't take another pump fake and then dribble into a floater from Patterson. Yeah. Because I think, this is practically the basis of the 3-point angle in modern analytics is that it's just a better shot. And you can afford. For me, it's also because I think that kind of stuff takes you out of your rhythm.
Yeah.
And we started looking at the ebbs and flows in a guy's shooting. It's just that you need to kind of be taking a certain amount just to keep yourself in the flow of it. Because if you're thinking about whether or not you should be taking a shot when you're in the process of being able to take one, it's already over.
Yeah.
It has to be reflex.
And there's a gap between you going from faking a 3-point shot to a floater, and that gap is ball handling, which he is not very good at. And at this late in his career, I don't think you can improve your ball handling. You are what you are at this point. Maybe you could become a better shooter at practicing more, but your ball handling, it's either you're a good ball handler growing up, you dribbled a lot and you had tight handles, or you're DeMar DeRozan, or you're Patrick Patterson. At this point, you're not going to develop that additional part of your game, so you may as well just stick with what got you here and take threes. And if you look at the threes he takes, or the threes he passes up, they're actually open. Like he actually oftentimes plays a defender into position by putting it on the ground.
Yeah, exactly. And this team doesn't need more drivers.
Yeah.
And again, I like Patterson. If the team winds up re-signing Patterson next summer, I will have nothing bad to say about it, so long as you're not talking about a crazy deal. But it's just for me in terms of the idea of locking yourself into him now at an extension that wasn't incredibly team-friendly price. Okay. And again, for a bench player, it's just it doesn't get me there.
Yeah. You want to talk about Tim Duncan's retirement or the style in which he retired?
It's perfect.
Was that yeah?
It's the kind of thing that for the last 6 years everyone said it's exactly how he'll do it, but you always sort of say it with a bit of your tongue in cheek because you figure for the sake of the Spurs, for the sake of the league, like he'll do some pomp and circumstance. And the fact that it has been absolutely nothing. It's been a written statement. It's been a photo of him in line at Walmart, and it's been this hilarious thing that happened today with his LinkedIn account. It's all I could have ever hoped for from Tim Duncan's retirement.
All right. So one last question before we sign off. So we talked about free agency a little, jumping around a little bit here. Is the team that just went into free agency with high hopes but got nothing out of it? Who do you think?
Oh, it's the Lakers.
Yeah. But can we laugh at them just a little bit more?
This is such karmic retribution for that team. It is. I mean, it's just the sheer idea that they really believe that they are entitled to players that makes this so gratifying to me. Yeah. It's this notion that we deserve to be in the room because we're the Lakers, and it's especially true because it's not even Dr. Buss doing it. It's his insipid little son who thinks that he's had anything to do with anything about this team and their past success. It was glorious to watch.
Yeah. And I don't know. I guess that was Luol Deng's only contract offer because that was the only justification I have of him going to join that team with D'Angelo Russell, Jordan Clarkson, Julius Randle, Timothy Mozgov, and Luol Deng as starters. Julius Randle's a nice guy. He's a nice piece, and he might become a pretty good NBA player. But man, beyond that, they don't have Ingram, I guess. But I mean, it's a sad situation for the Lakers if you're a Lakers fan. But if you're somebody else, it's awesome.
It's glorious. I mean, it's. Yeah, this is a perfect summer for what this team kind of deserves for the way that they've treated free agency the last few years.
Yeah. Well, Tim, I think that puts a bow on this one. It's a long one. Tim, thanks for coming on, man. I know the summertime is busy. Yeah, and
that was pretty good for August, getting an hour out of August 1st. I'm pretty impressed with
not bad. We got about 2 more months to go before training camp starts, and God knows we're going to talk about in the next 8 weeks. But I'm actually be off for the next 2 weeks. I'll be in Ukraine. I'll be visiting Ukraine. Yeah. For work for a couple of weeks. So Blake or will host the podcast in my absence. Listeners, thank you for joining the Raptors Weekly Podcast. If you want to support Raptors Republic, go to patreon.com/Raptors Republic. Like us on iTunes or rate us on iTunes. Give us a review. That's what people tell me to tell you. So go for it. Give us a rating and give us a positive one, hopefully. I'll see you in 3 weeks. And next week, it'll be Blake or Will with the Raptors Weekly Podcast. Tim, thanks a lot again, man.
Pleasure.
Listener, thank you. Goodbye.